Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update on Tuesday, the 2nd of December. Well, Chris Hipkins did his media rounds this morning and I think he smashed it out of the park, answering all pretty lame questions, and a pretty sleepy media who are on the National Party side on most things, it would appear, kind of did all sorts of funny tricks. I think I'm going to start this update from G News just by stating a couple of obvious facts. One is, nobody in this country has actually seen an analysis of all the council spending across the country and what proportion of it was a nice to have or the dumb stuff. However, I can tell you, as somebody that actually does pay attention a lot to some of the fine detail, that I interviewed Tory Whānau not too long ago, and that she said when it came to the Wellington Council, the amount of spending on the kind of things that Christopher Luxon refers to as dumb stuff amounted to about 1% of the overall budget. And the vast majority of spending by the council was really on things that really do matter and we would consider to be the core basic essential services that we all need. So here's the point. This morning on the Herald Now, the leader of the independent working group that Christopher Luxon made a huge fuss about in the Monday press conference was interviewed by our good friend Lion Ryan. And Lion Ryan asked Cameron Badgery, had there been any in-depth analysis done of the dumb stuff or the wasteful spending, I guess you might call it, the nice-to-haves. And you know what Cameron Badgery said? Well, he said, no, we hadn't even done that. We didn't even look into it. No idea. Now, don't you think that that's the point? Don't you think that before you come out and say we're going to introduce a rates cap, that you should actually know the splits? You should actually know, and so should the public, know how much councils are currently spending on things that are actually basic essentials versus these so-called nice-to-haves and how you would categorise them. So that's the first point. Secondly, there's been no real analysis done, has there, on the impacts to councils before this kind of policy is just implemented like a time bomb. And it's a time bomb that appeals to us all in the middle of a cost of living crisis, because none of us want our rates going up, and everyone agrees that double-digit rate increases is sustainable for people. We just can't afford to continue, whether you're a renter and that's getting passed on in your rents, or whether you're an owner of a piece of land and a property. You just can't keep on forking out more and more and more and more and more year after year after year after year for these kind of basic services. So none of that pre-work and none of that analysis and none of that serious factual information about the amount of spending that was wasted, the amount of nice-to-haves, the amount of dumb stuff was counted. And also, I think you just want to bear in mind that things that Christopher Luxon one day says are a waste of money, big white elephant, like a convention centre, the next day he's saying, look, isn't it great that Auckland's got a convention centre and we're going to have all of these tourists and we're going to have all these extra people in town and it's going to lead to GDP growth because convention centres are really good for events, but not in Wellington, where it's just a waste of money and, you know, council overspending, and they need to get back to the basics. So those kind of conflicts should be obvious to you now. So here you are as a public, not actually being given any of the information, not knowing how much council spending was actually on the basic essential services, not knowing what's coming in terms of your water bills. You're probably going to get $10,000 water bills next, aren't you? Maybe $20,000 water bills, because the rates will stay low, but the water bills will go up. And the councils that aren't actually charging for water, even if you're on tank supply, will suddenly send you an invoice for maybe a couple of $1,000s to make up for the money that couldn't be gained from rates. And also you'll be paying all this money for your rubbish collection, maybe $200 a month or something like that, to a private company. So isn't that great that Christopher Luxon has done this? Isn't it amazing that he's done it without actually informing you about the splits, what percentage, or any of that? So let's just look at the coverage this morning. Let's start off with Chris Chang on TVNZ Breakfast, where he talks to Chris Hipkins, and he says, you know, about the dumb stuff that councils are spending, but that he doesn't actually articulate in terms of any hard numbers or percentages.
Stop doing dumb stuff. You know, did you need to spend $2 million here in Wellington on a public toilet block? No, they didn't. Do you need to spend money on you know, judder bars and you know, rather than actually fixing roads?
Labour leader Chris Hipkins joins us now. Good morning, Mr. Hipkins. Have council just been spending money on dumb stuff?
Well, I don't think Christopher Luxon's in a position to lecture people about spending money on dumb stuff. I haven't seen any council spending tens of thousands of dollars chartering helicopters to fly to the top of a mountain so he could take a selfie eating pavlova for his Facebook.
So there, Chris Hipkins was great on the helicopter ride, the pavlova, the social media selfie. That was actually excellent example of the Prime Minister actually flouting all of the so-called, frugality that he expects everybody else to tighten their belts, but not himself, after just awarding himself a huge pay increase as well, and getting those valuations down. So he paid $8,000 less on his luxury batch at Onitangi, and the guy lives in a big house in Remuera. He's not short of a bob, and he recently appeared in the Women's Weekly. Here it is. I mean, look at that. I mean, these guys are really struggling. They can really identify with everybody that's on the breadline that just can't afford Christmas. So, these guys are in touch, and I think it was really good that Chris Hipkins actually just raised the point about the complete hypocrisy from LuxCon when it came to all of this. Then there was the kind of point about how the council's actually going to pay for these essential services, and that hadn't been answered by the government. Here's Chris Hipkins on that point.
I think councils have a really tough job at the moment trying to balance their budgets and do all of the things that people are expecting of them. My concern about the rates cap, and let's be clear, no one likes their rates going up, but my concern about the rates cap is that people will just end up paying in other ways. So all those councils that don't currently have water meters will suddenly be looking at installing water meters in order to fund the water infrastructure. The cost of putting out your bin could potentially go up as councils dial back their subsidies for rubbish collection. You could find, that taking the kids to the swimming pool costs a lot more in the future than it used to. So there's a real potential that people will end up paying more as a result of rates caps.
So Chris Hipkins also raises the point here where the government hasn't been upfront about how, the councils will deal with these kind of situations and what they should do.
I think the government needs to be a bit more upfront with the public about where all this is going to end up.
Then we got to the part where the media are really interested in knowing whether the Labour Party are going to repeal this. So this has just come out yesterday, 4 o'clock, the policy's announced. A couple of hours later, they interview Labour, Tangi Utukari, goes out there and he sort of says, look, we still have to talk about it. But by the next day, Chang is saying, no, what he actually said was you're going to repeal it, or he gave that hint. And Chris Hipkins has to say that's not what he said at all. What he said is we're going to meet next week, and that the Labour Party actually decide things as a team, not as a dictator or a single person.
Going to potentially repeal this if it gets back into government?
Well, we haven't even had a chance to have a discussion about that yet, so we'll discuss that as a team. We're not meeting as a team until next week. Unlike the National Party, who are having their emergency meeting this morning, we're not meeting as a team until next week.
Tangi Utukere seemed to imply that the party would repeal it. Was he misspeaking?
No, he hasn't said that. He said that we need to discuss that as a team, and we'll do that at our regular scheduled meeting next week.
Chris Hipkins brings up the nice-to-haves and the whole convention centre point here that I made earlier. Here it is.
Well, they're nice to haves. I mean, Christopher Luxon refers to the convention centre in Wellington. A few years back, John Key and Stephen Joyce were telling councils to build convention centres because we wanted to host more of those sorts of events in New Zealand. Nice to haves are a pretty subjective argument.
And the rest of that interview was about how Tova O'Brien had heard that Peeni Henare had been talking to Winston Peters about foreign affairs, therefore they must be talking about coalition agreements in a formal way, and created huge, gotcha, look at me, I've done this great scoop type story out of nothing really, which was a bit scurrilous and sort of, muckraking type politics, but it gave the rest of the media something to actually continue to breathe life into, because it's all a waste of time and bad for the country. So the media grab hold of it because maybe they could get some clickbait, create some myths, and get some, hater bots talking about this kind of stuff. People that actually, don't use a full stop or put a space before a comma. And basically what they did is they tried to perpetuate this morning and say that, Winston Peters and Labour are having formal talks and this is the case, so why are you denying it? But Chris Hipkins was basically like, no, that's actually happened at all. We haven't had any formal talks, and therefore you're just going to have to wait, like I've told you 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, yesterday and today, and you still don't listen, but you're going to carry on, aren't you? Because that's who our media are. You can trust them. And I guess that's why the trust ratings in media continue to fall all the time, because of this kind of game playing. Anyway, at the end of that interview, I guess we all felt like Chris Hipkins actually won, a bit of a boss, came in really prepared, handled everything well, asked the key questions about, how are councils going to pay for those essential basic services, and made the point that you're all going to pay anyway. Your water bills are going to go up. If you don't get a water bill, you will be getting one. And all of those other things that you might do, like go to the swimming pool, that's going to cost hundreds of dollars instead of just $20. Your rubbish collection is going to be so expensive that we're probably going to end up with piles of refuse, stray dogs, rats, dogs, disease, all sorts of things like this, because Christopher Luxon, he's had a big year, and he's celebrating Christmas with his family soon, and you've got to keep voting for it because it's incredible. They're doing an incredible job. In another interview, we had Ingrid Hipkiss. Ingrid Hipkiss was kind of like on to the same kind of shit about nice to haves.
But they've said that the councils just have to cut back on the nice to haves, focus on the basics, and stick within the 4%.
The nice to haves, that councils, that the current government thinks are nice to haves, are at the absolute margins. The vast bulk of what our local councils are spending money on are things like roads, rubbish, water infrastructure, swimming pools and parks, libraries. Those aren't nice to haves. Those are the basic services.
But hadn't considered the fact that this information's out there and hasn't been analysed by the government. She hasn't read into any impact statements. We haven't seen anything like that about this policy, which is in the future. And so she just wanted to know about nice to haves. Chris Hipkins replied again with the big question is how are councils going to pay for the basics and the essential services? Probably these other services will either be degraded or they're going to cost more. So, this is the point about this whole rates capping stuff. It looks good on the outside, doesn't it? And you go, oh, I think it's a good idea, until you look into the background that had been hidden from you. So there's a point here where Ingrid Hipkiss gets to the repeal point. All media were talking about, are you going to repeal this if you don't like it? And I think she hits a high G. Here's that footage.
Okay, well, given all of that and the fact that this has been well signalled, why haven't you made a decision about it? Why are you just at the talking about it stage?
Well, it hasn't actually been well signalled. This isn't something that the government... The government...
Yeah. So, yes, it was definitely a high G that she reached and screeched, actually, at this point, that it was actually very clear the entire policy had been out for months. Everyone had all the details.
This is something that they have just done recently, along with a whole lot of other things that they're asking local government to do. So we need to see the detail of what...
They've been talking about this for months.
Well, they only just released the proposal yesterday.
Until Chris Hipkins pointed out that it was only yesterday at 4:00 that all the details came out, that up until now there'd been some loose talk about this coming at a conceptual level, but Labor needed some time to go through it all, to have a look at it in detail, do a proper job, something the media, basically doesn't care about. It just wants instant replies and full detail, as if in some imaginary world, this had been out for months in full detail, and, you just shriek at high G.
The government.
We also had discussion about how we need more doctors, and this is about the only thing on media's mind this morning. We need more doctors, we need more doctors. How are you going to get the doctors? We need more doctors, we need more doctors. And Labor keeps on saying, look, a couple of years ago, we actually trained more doctors, and in a couple of years' time, they're actually going to come into service, and we want to keep them in New Zealand. We want to give them incentives to stay here. But that message just doesn't get through. So if you keep saying it, media just kind of gloss over and go, where are we going to get more doctors from? So this cycle has been carrying on all the way through the Labor Party conference in the weekend. It carried on yesterday. And this morning, here's what happened.
The conference over the weekend. How will you boost the number of GPs? Because you're going to need a lot more, aren't you?
We are seeing more graduates coming out of medical school, and we're expecting to see that, really tick up over the next few years because of the increased places that we funded previously. And so we want to keep those new doctors in the country, and we want them to go into primary practice.
Then we got to the Lion Ryan interview, and Lion Ryan kind of repeated many of the same kind of things about, whether we're going to repeal, whether we're going to get more doctors. And then he got on to a couple of funny topics where he basically thought that somehow or another the price of doctors would go up because more corporations would be competing for these opportunities for these loans. There's only 50 of these loans, and he had some wacky idea there. Anyway, carrying on, Lion Ryan had a couple of special topics.
I don't want to see GPs going to your doctor becoming like going to the supermarket where the whole system's locked up by two major, monopolies. We want to see the family doctor, the idea of going to see your family doctor, preserved. Forming a relationship with your family doctor has proven medical benefits, and I want to make sure that more New Zealanders can have that.
Commentary there about how when it comes to doctors, there's a continuity of care. Scientific research has shown that continuity of care when you see the same doctor is actually better for your health. And Chris Hipkins was touching on this, that we want to see family doctors stay family doctors. We don't want to see things taken over by corporates. We don't want corporates sort of having a monopoly like they do in the supermarkets, where there's just a couple of big players who are actually dominating everything. And as we've seen in Lower Hutt, you start getting services whittled away because it doesn't suit the corporation. So they just get rid of those face-to-face consultations, and you can just go online and still pay about $80 for something like that. So he basically did actually get Chris Hipkins to say, well, yes, we will be reinstating the previous Labor policy on pay equity. Here it is.
I wasn't. Are you going to reinstate Labor's previous scheme, yes or no?
Yes, we're going to reinstate that.
Okay, and so the $13 billion you're happy to wear?
We'll set out how much we think that's going to cost when we release our fiscal plan next year.
Do you think the previous estimate's wrong?
Well, those estimates always change because, you've got bargaining happening right now for some of the workforces covered by pay equity claims or potentially covered by pay equity claims.
So there it was a great big scoop, but he could not actually get his head around the fact that the numbers might be different, that the estimates might change. And then Lion Ryan, he's got this whole thing about, tax. The Labor Party are the only ones that tax things, not the National Party. The Labor Party, the only ones that borrow things. Nicola Willis never borrows any money. And therefore, to set this up so that he could actually attack the Labor Party and help the National Party as a neutral, no favours, New Zealand Herald service, chaired by Stephen Joyce at NZME and backed by Canadian billionaires. Well, basically, he was saying, well, look, when it comes to interest deductibility, you've only told me 100 times that you're going to have to wait for us, so let's have another go at asking the same question.
Interest deductibility, have you got, this is one of my little interests. Any update for us on where you... And because I asked you the other week about any other taxes you were going to do, does that include... And you said, nothing else. Does that include interest deductibility, or do you see that as separate?
I know that's a little bugbear for you, Ryan. As soon as we've sorted out our policy in that area, I'll let you know, but we haven't made our final decisions on that at this point.
OK, and so just to be clear, that is separate from your pledge not to increase other taxes?
We'll set out our policy on interest deductibility when we set out our fiscal plan. It is one of the things that we're working through at the moment.
OK.
So this morning, I'll just summarise again what I said at the beginning. You have not seen any kind of analysis from Chris Luxon or from Mr. Watts about the proportion of nice-to-haves or wasteful spending per council for those over 70 councils, have you? You haven't seen the analysis done. You know that the independent group led by Cameron Bagri had a couple of people from local government on there, had a couple of people from Australia on there. But they did not do an analysis of the actual wasteful spending that they are claiming is going on in local government. So they cannot back this up with any kind of evidence base. So this is not evidence-based policy. This is politics-based policy where you are in a cost of living crisis, you can't afford things, and suddenly along comes National with a time bomb and says, look, we'll stop this crazy bunch of councils from spending money at this rate and cap it down to this range. And you go, yay, isn't that great? But hidden from you is the how are the basics going to be funded in future? What's going to happen to your water bill now? is your water bill going to explode? Is it going to get, 3 times bigger in a year? Is it going to get 3 times bigger the year after that? How big is your water bill going to get? Is it going to get bigger than your rates bill? So Christopher Luxon's not answering that question. He isn't actually fronting up. He's deferring it. He's just saying, that's a question for the councils. Leave me alone. I'm on holiday now. So the National Party in real trouble. They're going backwards. This was kind of another knee-jerk kind of policy. Didn't do the analysis, didn't tell you the truth, left all these holes. Chris Hipkins was underlining all of those facts this morning as media tried to beat him up for acting like a team player that's going to consider things next week when he's actually had some time, more than a couple of hours, to digest the details and come to a proper decision. So it's not something the media wants us to do. They don't want the professionalism or the time taken. They want to hurry. They want the scoop now. They want the impact. They want the awards at the media awards. So this is what we're kind of seeing, I think. And we hit high G when anything alternative is presented to us as kind of a reasonable course of action for a Labour Party that's actually evidence-based, considering things properly, and not just giving you some kind of off-the-hoof reaction by a single person. Instead, it's teamwork. So that's all I have to say to you this morning. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.